welcome to Legally Speaking with me, Tarun Nangia. The topic of today is a very interesting one. Hunger has to be satisfied. This is what a bench of justices, Chief Justice of India, Justice N.V. Ramana, Justice A.S. Bopanna, and Justice Hema Kohli said, and directed the central government to formulate a scheme which will have, in a sense, provide for model community kitchens for all over the country. Of course, this scheme will be implemented via the states, and the Supreme Court has taken this issue seriously, and that is why we are here to discuss it today. I have a very eminent panel with me joining us for this discussion. I have with me Ma'am Pinky Anand. She's a senior advocate. As we all know, Ma'am has served as the Additional Solicitor General of India. Welcome to the show. I have with me the Additional Advocate General for the state of Chhattisgarh, Abhimanyu Bhandari. As we all know, he's been very recently appointed to this post. Many congratulations to you for your new assignment, which you have taken up. As also, we know that Mr. Bhandari is an advocate at the Delhi High Court and the Supreme Court of India. As an AAG also, he'll represent the Chhattisgarh state government in the Supreme Court. I have with me Shravan Shankar. He's an advocate. He practices at the Delhi High Court and the Supreme Court, based out of Delhi. I have with me Udit Gupta. He's managing partner of Udit Kishan and Associates. He's also a counsel himself, practices at the Supreme Court and the Delhi High Court, and his law firm also engages a lot of seniors and they do a lot of cases, so on and so forth. May I request Ma'am Pinky Anand to lay the ground for this discussion by telling us that the Chief Justice of India took up this very sensitive issue, and we saw even in earlier hearings, he was very persistent that hunger has to be satisfied. And you see this kind of a direction coming. Could you lay the ground before we move further?
Tarun, the ground for this entire situation, I think, is a welfarian concept that is pervasive across the system and across the Supreme Court's voicing. And I think it has been heightened increasingly during the period of COVID and the pandemic, where you had lakhs of migrant workers who were displaced and were facing starvation deaths. Even though there's some issue about the numbers that the states gave or they didn't give, but I think it's an undisputed position that there have been starvation deaths throughout the country because of this pandemic, and people having to move out from the cities back to their native states, and the infrastructure not being ready to be able to cope with that. Considering that, I think what happened with the Supreme Court was, all said and done, that the Supreme Court was taking up these issues in a gigantic way. I mean, it was a leap forward and progressive. So you found that the Supreme Court, right from March 2020, if I'm not mistaken, whenever the court started after about a couple of months down the COVID time, the Supreme Court started taking cognizant notice of all the issues which surrounded the pandemic and the related problems there too, which included health workers, which included students, which included flights flying in and out of India, which included, of course, the primary issue being migrant workers who were stranded on account of the inevitable situation which had arisen on account of the pandemic. So I think if we look at this, and we also look at the fact that India does boast by now of having the National Food Security Act, 2013. We have a backdrop to it. In fact, I still remember the time when this act came up, and it was a matter of some debate. Ultimately, of course, the states are to implement food and security issues, but the center came out with the National Food Security Act in order to ensure that food went to each and every person and people were not denied. And in fact, it went beyond that. So the issue has not arisen exactly today. It had arisen sometime in 29th of June 2021, when the Supreme Court passed a detailed order taking into account the starvation deaths, take into account what had happened to the migrant workers, take into account the one nation, one ration card principle, that wherever you were, you would actually continue to have ration made available to you. In the backdrop of this and the current data that have come around, and in fact, some of it is outdated, to be honest. So the question was how to ensure that people do have the right to life. Now, Article 21 has been construed widely and progressively by the courts from time to time, including within its ambit, almost all dimensions. And food, obviously, even possibly more than air. I'm not sure which is more important, but food is the first and foremost step. So the Supreme Court, in an effort to ensure that how do people get. So ration is being given, and ration is being given at the subsidized rate. And you have additional food grains also being given. But the question of how you ensure that people don't die, I mean, that's really ultimately, as you took the first statement to say that hunger cannot be allowed to prevail and hunger has to be put an end to. So I think it is entire motion on this level and the progressive stance that the Supreme Court has taken to consider how to ensure. What is important, it is well to be appreciated, is the fact that the Supreme Court has said come with a model scheme. Let the centre come with a model scheme which will be implemented by the states, obviously, whether the states or, as the Attorney General said, the panchayats. That's a logistic issue, but logistically it has to be the states. But a model scheme which can be utilized. And I remember we had done a similar exercise earlier, Tarun. I don't know whether you were party to that, but the midday meal scheme also. The Supreme Court, in fact, heard these PILs and it was deciding on how to have, again, model schemes which could be done across states with the necessary state variations that would be needed to run the scheme. So with the backdrop of this is what I think the landscape of the entire discussion is.
Thank you for sharing all these information nuggets with us on this issue. I'll go to Advocate Abhimanyu Bhandari. Mr. Bhandari, you represent a state which has very successfully implemented a rice scheme, which is a chawal scheme where for 1 or maybe 2 rupees, rice is given to people so that they don't die of hunger. Now we see this concern in our Supreme Court also, where the judges are saying that, to achieve certain goals, the first is that there should be no hunger. The second would be to have a facility like the NHS of the UK, which you can share with us about. Because, these are goals. You first are food sufficient, people don't die of hunger, then you move to health. We can see the Supreme Court is taking, in a sense, cognizance of these issues and directing formation of policy. Could you decode this as a democracy grows? These things become important. Do you think the Supreme Court is taking that lead role that certain things are non-negotiable? People shouldn't die of hunger.
No, absolutely. I think the Supreme Court has taken the lead on this, not only from today, from this matter, but even before this matter, during the COVID times, when we saw the writ petitions that were being filed in Supreme Court, then a bench headed by Honorable Justice Bhushan, who's retired now, but who was sitting at that time, in a detailed judgment noted that a lot of steps were being taken by various states to ensure that community kitchens are available. But those were more, directed towards just during the pandemic and for migrant laborers who were stranded. Now, I think what the Supreme Court is doing now is very, very important, because for the first time, we've ever seen a talk about a comprehensive policy, a national policy to regulate community kitchens, so that this has trappings of a good social system where, just like you mentioned, free medical aid should be given to everybody, and there should be a policy for that. That way, I think the first and the foremost thing is that everybody should be able to get a meal, and should be able to afford a meal, depending on whichever strata of the society that person belongs to. Now, if you look at what states are already doing, there is actually significant amount of community kitchens all around the country. I mean, of course, there's more to be done, but it's not like it's not happening. It is still happening. If you look at, there are 38 community kitchens in Punjab that was reported in a Supreme Court judgment, 140 Annapurna canteens in the state of Telangana. Karnataka has a large number of community kitchens called Indira canteens, I think, within the city municipal corporations. So I think there are a number of states which are doing things, and not only Chhattisgarh, but a number of states. But I think what we need is a national policy. Now, way back, I think in November, a few months back, the government did mention that they will come up with a policy. And I think 8 food secretaries around from various states were handpicked, and a committee was formed to form this policy. But I don't think so. This policy has still seen the light of the day. And I very much hope that with the Supreme Court monitoring this now, we soon have a national policy regulating all community kitchens and ensuring that community kitchens are provided in every state and in every district of our country, so that no one sleeps hungry.
That's a good point. And thanks for sharing that in whatever states you mentioned, Telangana and other states, so that we have an idea that where all this has been done successfully in terms of community kitchens. I'll go to Shravan Shankar. Shaman, where do you see this coming from? What Justice Ramanna, Justice Bopanna, Justice Hima Kohli led them to direct the central government to frame policy for these community kitchens. What is the Supreme Court aiming for here? Could you share with us?
So coming to your question, Tarun, that how does this, from where is this coming? So existing schemes are all fragmented and scattered between departments and various ministries, etc. There is a need for consolidation to ensure you have a national scheme and where community kitchens can be kept to ensure that there is no starvation. Now, it ingrains, in fact, about 6 years ago in a writ petition 857 of 2015, Swaraj Abhiyan matter it is called, Justice Ramana, he actually highlighted some concerns with respect to National Food Security Act 2013. Along with that, he also said how National Disaster Response Force and National Disaster Mitigation Fund has to be formed. So these are concerns which perhaps have been ingrained long ago, and now with the pandemic, it has come to highlight of everybody. So in fact, if you look at what the court is saying, is that what is very significant is Supreme Court is saying that don't look at this adversarially. It is asking the government, okay, let's not get technical about how a scheme has to be put. If it's a policy issue, Supreme Court can come in or not. Like as Pinky ma'am just now said that, the midday meal scheme actually was originally a dry ration scheme in many states. Supreme Court in the matter of PUCL, I would in fact have the order also. This was 20th November 2001, about 20 odd years ago, has directed the states to turn this dry ration scheme into a midday meal scheme. So they ensure that delivery is taken place. So that is how Supreme Court has been considering this issue from, in fact, I would say way back from 1981. That is where the Supreme Court has actually declared that adequate nutrition and food is a right to life under the Constitution. That is when it was recognized in Francis Caroline matter, and subsequently in 1990 also. So therefore, all of this has been a part of the Supreme Court's orders over 30 odd years or 30 or 35 odd years. But what Supreme Court right now is saying is that you have to bury all the differences you might have politically, constitutionally between states and center, where the center is saying that, look, the transportation, the logistics have to be taken care by the state. And what the states are asking, like UP said, we only want 2% of additional grains and we will formulate a policy. So Supreme Court is quite clear in what they want to do.
So Shravan says the Supreme Court is clear in what they want to do. Udit Gupta joins us. Udit, if I may ask you, you've gone through the proceedings, what happened in November, what happened a couple of days ago. Does this order have elements of direction or nudging the center to formulate policies? Is the court clearly nudging the center and saying, okay, just pay attention because this is also important? The court can go all the way in direct formation, but do you think this amounts to nudging the center and the executive into action as far as food security is concerned?
Right. I think it's very right, as Shravan just said, that court said that don't take it as an adversarial litigation. Take it as a humanitarian approach. Ma'am also just told us, Pinky ma'am, that it's a midday meal scheme which was implemented and which has helped many, many people. And I would say that, yes, it is very important that the way the court is taking it, the approach to sort this issue, the hunger issue has to be sorted. Like the air is important or the food, both are equally important. You can't say which is less. And the approach by the court is that, like Shravan also just pointed out, that don't take it a constitutional political issue. In fact, Justice Ramana has been very candid in making it very light, saying it's a very big election issue. Right now it's election time, I do not want to comment. So he's trying to persuade people that please come out with a solution. Don't go into policies and just seeing what you can do, what you can't do. He says, come with suggestions and let's sort it. And in fact, he's saying that make it a statute if possible, so that it sticks around for a longer period of time and not just for the moment. A policy, the government changes, the policy can change. But if a statute is made, it takes time to set it aside. It's not easy to set aside a statute. So definitely Justice Ramana is looking at a long-term approach to the issue.
Okay. Thanks for sharing that nugget that this is a formation of a statute and not a mere policy which can be changed when governments change. Thank you for sharing that point with us. On this note, we'll take a short break and we'll be right back. Welcome back. Just before the break, we had Udit Gupta sharing with us that, in a sense, Justice Ramana said that a statute, in a sense, has to be approved, not a mere policy. For that, it can stay longer. I'll now take this point to Senior Advocate Pinky Anand. Ma'am, I had interviewed Justice Sikri recently, and he said that the duty of the Supreme Court, and in a sense the court, is to nudge the executive and claw back. Where do you rate this direction on that scale? Is the Supreme Court nudging and coming back, or is it directing formation of policy? What is the Supreme Court doing here?
I think these areas are very grey, Tarun. I don't think it's a crystal clear area where you can actually demarcate and say it is, either an order is being passed, nudging is being done, or kind of clawing back is concerned. So between all these three, I would say the best scenario in this case would be a question of the court nudging the government to do it, because ultimately it is not doing so itself. Of course, a slight bit of pressure is obvious. I mean, when you are having costs being imposed on states for not filing affidavits, of course, the costs were waived ultimately, which shows a generosity to say, we are not trying to punish you. We want you to come to terms and to take care of the needful. But definitely the whole question being one that please do it. But if you don't, we'll be forced to think about something is possibly the kind of statement that is coming across. And in any case, Tarun, the point is, I still remember when we were talking to Abhimanyu and, Chhattisgarh being the state that he now represents as the additional advocate general, that was the first state where I saw the Food Security Act. And what a marvelous expansion of that scheme. And even today, during the COVID times, the way people have responded to the government stand on giving additional food grains, additional food and ration during this period has been something which has been commended and looked at upon by people. Today, there is nothing you can do beyond feeding people. That's the first and primary. The starvation issue is something which frightens you. Whatever may happen in life, I mean, as it is, we are besieged with COVID and the pandemic and every other condition which health has, now put on us. And possibly your concept of NHS and asking Abhimanyu on those lines separately may be a different issue. But that is a secondary thing in its own way. You start with food and survival. Survival is based upon that. Keeping that in mind, I think the Supreme Court definitely is nudging, and Supreme Court has increasingly played this role of a nudger, if I might use that expression very positively, incidentally, and to say, do it, please. However, if you don't, and then it leaves kind of dotted line there and says, in any case, my belief is, this is right. The committee was set up of 8 food secretaries, and they had to come through with something. But what happens, unfortunately, you notice this during that Delhi oxygen crisis also, by the way, that you had issues between trying to sort out. There is this entire conflict at times between states and the center. So trying to resolve it across a level, you require something. We did the same thing, for example, with the victims compensation scheme in Indira Jaisingh's case, which took place in the Supreme Court, where ultimately the victims compensation scheme was drafted and brought forward under the Act. So you have the entire perceptual part there. All you need is to put it together, and Supreme Court made it clear. This scheme is not binding, as in it's not to be taken across. It may have variables. So that is fine. The only question that would remain possibly in addition to the model scheme is the finances. Where do the finances come from?
It's a very important point. Where do the finances come from? Because even for existing food security law that we have in place, we need a lot of money. I'll go to Abhimanyu here. Abhimanyu, now states have their own schemes to provide food and ration. There are community kitchens, which you shared in your last answer. The states already have it. We have a Food Security Act in place. We have a midday meal scheme in place. India has always this problem of multiple agencies for one thing and multiple schemes for everything. Do you think what Supreme Court says would not be achieved if it creates yet another law and yet another scheme to provide food overriding or in addition to whatever already exists? Are we going right here, or where are we going? Can you decode this for us?
Tarun, I think we are going on the right track. Providing food to every person should not just be merely a discretionary component in our social fabric. It should be a legal right. And I hope and I pray that this particular proceedings that are going on before the Supreme Court culminates in ensuring that everybody has a legal right to a meal. Now, as far as Food Security Act you're talking about, and you're talking about various schemes, we've seen that there is a fair amount of schemes where, there is this quota about a portion of food grain one can get. We are here talking about community kitchens. We are talking about prepared meals. We are talking about a meal so that a person is, a person just can't eat grain, right? You need kitchens. So when you deal with homeless people, when you deal with the most vulnerable part of our society, you need to ensure that you provide them with a meal. For example, in the US, you had the whole campaign on hot soups being provided to people. In UK, you have food banks where people can go and pick up a basket which has 3 meals for the whole day packed in one basket, which one can take home. So I think that it's important that we have this community kitchen system and we have a national policy which culminates into a legal right to a cooked meal wherever you are in the country, if you're hungry, you have a right to go to a particular center and get a cooked meal. I think we've come very, very near to that. And, as far as you said, you quoted Honorable Justice Sikri saying that, nudge and then claw back. And that's what the Supreme Court does. I think in many places where Supreme Court wants something to be done, and the former ASG will be in a much better position to tell us, they don't just nudge and claw back. They claw, and they can claw in. So I hope that in this case, they actually claw in and they ensure that getting a cooked meal from a community kitchen becomes a legal right of every citizen of this country.
Point well taken. I'll now take this point to Shravan Shankar. Shravan, two things. I have predominantly in the south of this country, I have seen that election campaigns have this whole concept of hot cooked meals being provided for a certain price. And we first saw in the south that this scheme was very successful.
Yes.
This was entirely a state scheme. The central had nothing to do with it. And the states have done their work. What is happening here? Is the center, in a sense, wanting such kind of endeavors to be done pan-nationally from Kashmir to Kanyakumari? You have such community kitchens all over. Anybody who wants can go and buy it for 2-3 rupees. I won't name the state, but another state tried to copy this scheme. For 2-3 rupees, you can maybe get a full cooked meal. We saw private fast food centers usurping that place and doing frolicking business because these were in the heart of the city. It's prime real estate for free. And actually, that's a scam, and that's another issue we'll discuss some other day. But it's not so easy to implement. A lot depends on the states because the center can formulate a scheme, but if the state is not interested, nothing happens. And so we see many schemes, some states end up drawing all the funds for a certain central scheme, and many other states are not even interested in taking their share of funds. Do you think the Supreme Court has a very tough task at hand here? Because, in this country, the cases go on and benches keep on changing. And a lot of things change when benches change. We also know that, it depends on how they want to push this issue. Do you think this is a very tough nut to crack, what the Supreme Court has envisioned?
No doubt, Tarun, it is a very complex nut to crack. But there is no nut so hard in this country which Supreme Court can't crack, is what I feel. So this is in the south, there are many schemes, Telangana, Andhra, both. In fact, Justice Ramana comes from Telangana. At least that is what I would like to believe, though he belongs to both the states equally. But we have seen the schemes. So he's come from a very modest background, rural background, and he understands these issues very well. Also, what is very important is that when you provide a hot cooked meal is not a commodity. Like if you provide a dry ration to somebody, it can be, if you subsidize and provide 1 rupee rice, and it can be resold somewhere else. A hot cooked meal cannot be a commodity for someone to misuse it. So misuse of this is very minimal, I think, as far as I understand. But what is very important here is that we have to see the kind of nudges Supreme Court has given. Supreme Court has clearly given 2 nudges, one to the center, with respect to, in fact, 2 to the center, because the Undersecretary of Central Government has filed an affidavit on behalf of the central government. The Supreme Court is not happy about it. It's a very serious issue. A principal secretary has to file it, and perhaps the next affidavit has to come from the principal secretary. Secondly, also the data to be provided to the Supreme Court is not the latest data. So Supreme Court has been waiting to see the latest data on with respect to starvation deaths. See, India today, if you look at the global hunger index, we stand at 101 in the year 2021. We are behind countries like Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Nepal in South Asia. I'm just saying. So it's a global issue for us, and also national issue more importantly. So what is very clear is that, yes, it's a difficult situation for the Supreme Court to handle at this point, where the states are saying that you pay the fund. See, today, the state wants center to pay for it, and state wants to take credit for it, and the other way around. So how do we come to a consensus? And that's the reason why a non-adversarial approach is very important in this. And also, lastly, it's very important. The most landmark case in the Supreme Court with respect to this issue is the PUCL versus Union of India writ petition, where all these schemes which are there, the Supreme Court has converted them into legal entitlements. So all the midday meal, all the Anna Yojana schemes, all of them have been converted into legal entitlements, and the orders also, they are umbrella orders which cover compliance and accountability of the states. So Supreme Court has been dealing with this issue for over 20 years, and I'm sure Supreme Court can resolve this issue amongst the states.
Shravan, very well pointed out. You said that Justice Ramana comes from Telangana, Andhra, that belt. They have been successful in providing such hot cooked meal schemes. And I mean, for this 150 crore people to feed them is never an easy task. And it is always going to be a challenge. But it is also good to point out that nowhere since independence at a pan-India level has such a scheme been envisioned where hot cooked meals are provided. Everybody pointed out schemes, but that's all food grain. And all these cooked schemes have been state schemes. So at the central level, there was never a push for a community kitchen scheme. I'll take this to Udit. Mr. Udit Gupta, if you could share with us, this will lead to formation of a bill will be passed like the right to food security bill. Then it will be turned into law and then the states have to perform. You think this is a very long drawn out process given India because it has to go to cabinet, then select committee, there is a long process to it. Do you think this is the start of a really long journey? Because of course, it's not easy. There are objections and suggestions. Then the parliament passes, then the states have to implement. There's the issue of money that Ma'am Pinky Anand pointed out, because a provision has to be made from the existing budget. Anyways, we are cutting short on existing schemes because, so how does this work now from here on?
Now, see, as the chief has pointed out already, that we have to first start with the implementation. Start with something, he says. He wants to get the ball rolling, right? Once the ball is rolling, obviously we are short of funds. The AG said that we'll have to get some additional taxes. 2%, if that's the issue, I can add 2% more grains and give it to the states. Let the states look after the logistics and the implementation of the scheme. But practically, that will not end there. There will be more. See, today, Punjab being an agricultural state, 2% rain may be enough for them to implement it. But if I go to Goa or Kerala, they don't have food grains. They have spices. They have tea and coffee growing. So there I will need to give more grains. I mean center. Center would need to give more grains to them. So implementing of the act will definitely take time. And that depends on the majority, the government being able to take it up. No doubt being a social issue, it will be easy to implement for the government. But definitely it will take time. Hence, the CJI wants the ball rolling, as I just repeated myself.
CJI wants the ball rolling. I'll take this to ma'am. Shravan, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, one small point I would like to put in. So, the Supreme Court has not gone into the issue of what is to be served in the community kitchen, the diet, because every state has a different diet altogether. And they've not gone into if it has to be paid or subsidized to what level, etc. You can charge 1 rupee or 2 rupees, etc. Now, the only one single point which everyone will agree to is that today in our country, we have sufficient resources to meet this challenge. It is only a matter of formulation. And it can only happen if a human approach is given and a non-adversarial approach is given. That is all.
Okay. One last comment from Ma'am Pinky Anand before we end the show. Ma'am, if you think of it, it seems like a very, very big task. Community kitchens in all 600 districts of this country, and in each district is so large. And you will need so many of these kitchens, so much of money to set it up. And of course, there is the issue of elections and states having their own priorities and so on and so forth. Do you think that this is a very, very impossible task to accomplish?
I think it is a gigantic task, Tarun. It's frightening. In fact, I know that when we were talking about the migrant labor when it got displaced in March 2020, the question of feeding them, which kept arising from time to time, and all of us were using our resources, our personal resources, as much as the government was doing to actually help people and to feed them. We do have, for example, community kitchen concepts between, say, let us say, langar, the seva that is done. So you do have between various communities such exercise being done. But to be done at a national level, considering the task involved, the finances involved, the logistic involved, what criteria are you going to use? Are we going to step into a welfarian country whereby, let me take it another way. I know one of, for example, the criticisms that was possibly leveled against the Food Security Act was the minute you start providing food to people, will they work? You've had a setback in countries when you've actually fed people. So the question is, if you do it free, if you do it at no cost, that is also an issue. So the categorization that we have followed to some extent is a fairly useful one. In extreme cases, particularly during the current timings of COVID pandemic, if of displacement or mass scale displacement, a refugee-like situation, it's another matter. On a regular basis, I have some questions which remain open.
Okay. So will free food at a very subsidized price lead to labor shortage? Because labor will not migrate to work. That's a different question. Also is a question of human rights, because most of our labor works in appalling conditions. But may I request that we'll do that debate on another day. But I would like to thank Ma'am Pinky Anand. I'd like to thank Abhimanyu Bhandari, Shravan Shankar, Udit Gupta for sparing time for such very important issue. The case goes on in the court. We will track it hearing by hearing and do a discussion, because food security involves all of us as a country, and it also involves our self-respect. When we have travelers from abroad coming here and hearing about starvation, it's not really a good thing. And also is the issue of our conscience. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you.